Caleb, welcome to Builders. Thank you so much for being here with us. I am very excited for today. I know we are probably going to be in for a long one, but there's going to be so much value across so many areas because you are just one of the most curious people I think I've ever met.
Thank you so much. Oh, it's a pleasure to be here with you, Alex. Very excited. Yeah, very excited. We're gonna have a lot of fun with this.
Amazing. I want to just start with the fact that when we were trying to set up the time for this recording, you factored in your food intake, timing, and what you were eating. You factored in time for energy production. You factored in your nootropic stack. And I mention this because I think it speaks to both the meticulous personality that is, in my opinion, must be at the core of driving your success as a builder and entrepreneur, as well as it hints to one of the many depths of expertise and knowledge that we're going to talk about today. So you are a holistic biohacker extraordinaire, a prolific serial entrepreneur. You've got upgraded formulas. You also were a high-level holistic biohacking coach to some very big names. And you also have had many other businesses, including Young and Raw, which was your first exit. As always, I've given a peek into you, but I would love for you to introduce yourself. Who are you and what are you building?
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was beautiful. And yeah, it's one of those interesting stories that goes in a whole lot of cool ways. But one of the core beauties of it is the synchronicity, the path of synchronicity and flow from just being a human on earth and navigating the world in different ways and trials and tribulations, growth and evolution in a lot of those ways. And so I've always had like a core of, self mastery of like, okay, how can I figure this body out? I can figure this mind out, right? And I got interested in that, selfishly for myself first. And then eventually I learned that, oh, wow, I can actually help others with this in a lot of ways. I became very passionate about that. So early on, I started out in like athletics. So I started out as a pro snowboarder, professional martial artist, gold medal martial artist, national, international championships, and a lot of different physical activities, extreme sports, right? Background acrobatics and gymnastics and things too. So I loved doing really extreme stuff early on, had a lot of energy and a lot of drive. And I was just curious, like, how far can I push my body? Which in turn taught me a lot about how far can I push my mind. And I realized that they're very interconnected. And I realized that eventually everything's interconnected. It's all connected. So that really helped along my journey set a really interesting foundation. And then when I got into the world of business, starting out developing skill sets, I was just like, how can I learn things to not only optimize and help myself achieve what I want as goals in my life, but with the passion, overlapped of like, how can I help a lot of people, and make, good money in the process, and ideally have a lot of fun doing it, sort of like the Ikigai exercise, right? It's a really wonderful one to do. And so, yeah, a lot of really interesting, twists and turns along the way, getting into things, getting curious, like you said, being very meticulous, and realizing from each failure before to each success thereafter and everything in between, it's like, oh, there's more, there's more, there's more. So that curiosity, that drive, fascinated with so much, and core of human psychology, and we got a background in neuroscience and evolutionary biology and psychology, and understanding like, why do I do the things I do? Why do other people do the things they do? And where in there can we work better together? How can we communicate more effectively? How can we build things that help more people or solve more problems? One of my good friends, he calls me a solutions guy. He's like, you're a solutions guy. You see things and your brain thinks in a systems thinking kind of way of how can you, to optimize that thing. But there, I will say there is a limit to that. You can over-optimize to a certain degree. We'll get into that later. But going through that and building different companies over the years, I just had a lot of fun trying new things. And just my own health journey led into health businesses. Originally got started in the marketing world, digital products, education, information marketing in that way. Marketing psychology is a core, and just growing companies, growing brands, and doing product launches and everything early on. And I was very blessed to have amazing mentors along the way that I appreciate greatly, who helped guide me along that path and understand like, you can actually do things like in copywriting. You can write words that influence people to, buy or invest in certain things to help transform their lives. And it was a very inspiring, sort of leadership from the mentors along my path to then be like, okay, how can I do more of this and really enjoy and learn along the way too, right? It's a simultaneous path. So I started getting into building businesses, and it was super fun. I was always an entrepreneur since a kid. The lemonade business when I was a kid. I had a sage business. I used to collect sage in my backyard in Colorado and wrap it up with yarn. And I had a notebook ledger with pen and paper, and I'd go to the town market and I'd sell it. And my mom loved sage, and it was kind of inspiration for me. And I made some money, and I could buy cool snowboards and fun things I wanted. And it was a really fun way to start. So getting into that, it's just stepping stones and building blocks that led to one company after the other, and each one was another building block to build on top of a solid foundation.
Wow. I want to dive into everything you just said. And just before we do that, is there a moment, I mean, you talked about the lemonade and sage business, but is there a defining moment or something that you kind of knew you were meant to be a builder, and you're now working predominantly on upgraded formulas? Like, why this business? Why now? Is it seeing an opportunity in the market? Is it something that you just have to get out into the world?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. It's funny because it literally comes down to like elements and foundations. My journey I can go through with the health aspect of things is I had a lot of health challenges when I was younger. And my mom would take me to the doctor. She was very metaphysical and into a lot of woo-woo stuff, as some people would call it. And I rebelled against that a bit and went hardcore science, got into neuroscience and other fun things. But with my health, I had to figure out what would work for me, because every time I come back from the hospital with medications and antibiotics, whatever it was, I actually felt worse. And I just noticed this strange pattern. So pattern recognition, we're all built for that. The human mind is an amazing pattern recognition organic engine, right? It's like a distinction I have, OI plus AI. So it's organic intelligence, like our human intelligence, which to me is the best technology on Earth. Nature kind of figured it out before we monkeys did. And then AI is some really cool stuff we'll get into later on that. But I use my organic intelligence to be like, how do I feel better, basically, is the core of it. And so going into that was like, how do I figure this stuff out? And then when I realized I could help other people, I started connecting some dots. So the realization, sort of like getting me on the path of building things and helping people in those ways, I realized that everyone has unique skill sets and talents, and not everyone thinks like you, and that's okay. It's a beautiful thing, actually. We're all unique, and we all can contribute something in the world. We all have something we're passionate about, or we're all really good at something. Michael Phelps was born to be a swimmer. His body's built for it, right? Not everyone can swim like that guy can. Lance Armstrong, his body physiologically is built for riding a bicycle. And, it's just, the list goes on. Michael Jordan, pretty awesome at basketball, right? So there's a lot of really interesting things where you can align, nature and nurture in some ways to get awesome results or accomplish great things. And I noticed that the patterns I was seeing, not everyone else would see. And I thought everyone just thought that way early on. And then I realized, when I was young, I was like, oh, not everyone sees this way. I was like, okay, that's cool, but like, what can I do about it? How can I help? How can I make a difference in some way, right? And I would see a challenge or a roadblock, and I would just kind of build things in my mind first. I was very inspired by Nikola Tesla early on. He was famous for building, engineering in his mind of some contraption for 2 or 3 years. And then when he built it physically in real life, it worked, right? But it took him a long time to figure that out. So between Nikola Tesla and being inspired by Da Vinci, for example, Leonardo da Vinci, just was like, okay, these people have been doing this a long time, and we each have the capacity to do so. So in finding those patterns and seeing where the friction is, I feel it's a bit of a part of a gift and something I've also developed and conditioned. And I have a saying, less friction, more flow. And I just go through and see, like, where's the areas of friction, right? In a business, in a team, communication dynamics, in a relationship, in health. It's a high leverage framework. I find that looking through that lens, anyone can train themselves in that. And you can identify, okay, where's the blockage here? And how can we resolve that blockage? And how can we let what naturally exists flow better? So it was like a core to it. And then I started applying that in one area, experience a bit of success, and apply it to another and another. And I realized, oh, this is kind of universally, applicable. And that framework, my whole life is just a continual high leverage optimizing framework to work with on a regular basis to accomplish whatever I direct the energy to.
I love that. So taking that into kind of what you're focusing on now, how did you arrive at your current focus?
Yeah, so in the particular case of upgraded formulas, we specialize in nanomineral technology. So it's very simple to understand. A lot of people are like, oh, it's crazy science, but it's actually really easy. So we just take a molecule like magnesium, for example. If anyone's ever seen, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids as a classic one, or Ant-Man, right, which is a modern one, we just shrink the size of the molecule down to the nanoscale, and we maintain the integrity structure of the mineral. So whether it's magnesium or potassium or iodine or whatever it might be, a lot of the products are all nanomineral based. And when you have a nanomineral base, what happens is you get incredible absorption. So a lot of different versions of magnesium in the market, though great in their own ways, they're all large molecules. So, super big, your body needs to expend extra energy to break it down to get it into the cell to actually be used and actually do what it's supposed to do. Magnesium, for example, does a whole lot, right? So when you shrink that down, the body actually has the internal intelligence in your DNA. It knows what to do with it when it has the right building blocks. So it was a really beautiful synchronicity story, a mutual friend connection to my business partner who founded the company. And when we connected, it was just supposed to be like, hey, maybe you can help him out with some fun things. And long story short, flourished into a beautiful dynamic. We flow really well together. We have a lot of fun together. And I've re-engineered the business from the ground up, from manufacturing to 3PL logistics to marketing to internal team communications. I've bolted in AI and built a lot of custom stuff baked in there, which is incredible to play around with. And all of it's to support the core goal of how can we help people get the foundation of mineral health and mineral sufficiency, which then actually helps every other system thereafter, right? So when I geeked out about mitochondrial biophysics, which I won't go too nerdy about, I realized that electrons are the smallest unit of energy, and that's what everything breaks down to. And minerals are the foundational substrate that facilitates electricity to flow. Right? If you take a computer, I grew up building computers, for example, and when you take a computer and you put it into water, well, it fries the circuits, right? Why does it do that? You could put it into distilled water, and it doesn't fry the circuits, cools it down. What's the difference? Well, distilled water has all the minerals removed. So the minerals are conductive; they conduct electricity, and we are biochemical, bioelectric, biomagnetic beings. As organic structure, and when you identify like the missing minerals or ratios you have too high or too low. From there, entire aspect of health and well-being, your mindset, your psychology, your personality, everything can change for better or for worse. So when you can identify, again, where's the friction, where's the flow, minerals are a foundational element literally to that. And I got super geeked up, tried the products, felt the difference, and I was like, this is something I know that almost like literally every human being on planet Earth can benefit from. And it aligned a lot with my core values and goals of, positive measurable impact. How can I positively and measurably impact the lives of 1 billion people? Sort of a core mantra I learned years ago that's always stuck with me and I meditate on often. And everything I do now is kind of put through that filter of sorts.
I love that. And I think the mineralization, I have learned about that in various ways. The most memorable one is when you go to Burning Man, you have to bring all your water. And you can buy distilled water and you can buy mineral water in, let's say, a Walmart, which is what most people are stopping on their way to Burning Man in Black Rock City. And people who don't know mistakenly buy distilled water, and they're out sweating and trying to hydrate themselves, and they drink distilled water, which has no minerals, and it will actually suck the minerals that you have out of you, and it will make you very sick. Like extreme, you will lose your minerals. You also won't be able to retain hydration, and basically your body like short circuits, to your point of like we're electrical. It's very scary, obviously, but it stuck with me as like somebody explained that to me. I was like, I will never forget.
Always remember it.
Minerals and not to drink distilled water. That's okay. So I love that. And along your journey, now we've just talked about kind of how you got into upgraded formulas and, that same process that you've basically been through over and over and over and over. What are some of the most kind of pivotal points along that journey? You mentioned mentors. I'm sure there have been some mistakes. I want to hear a little bit more around, your why is so clear and you're so passionate and you're so driven and you're so curious, which is amazing. Obviously, your capacity for learning is immense. But nothing is linear in life. And, people are listening to this and they're at the beginning, they're at the end, they're in the middle of their journey. What are some of the kind of most memorable points along the way for you?
Oh, it's a beautiful one. Um, yeah. You know what? It's so funny. There's a few. One that comes up is actually from people on their deathbed. It's very interesting. A mentor of mine early on, as he was getting older, the time he was about like 78 or so, and he was like, approaching 80. And he was just like, he's like, you know what? The older I get, the less F's I give. I don't know if you can swear on here, but
Yeah, go for it.
it's just a really funny one. And I was just like, that's interesting. Okay, can you explain more about that? And he was like, you know what? I just grew up thinking this mattered and that mattered. What these people thought of me mattered. The opinions of everyone matter so much more. To a degree, they do, of course. But to really just embrace being yourself fully, like embracing your eccentricity and your weirdness and your passions and your curiosities. I mean, someone might be like obsessed with butterflies, for example, and it's cool, it's butterflies, whatever, but they might discover some species of butterfly that somehow has something that's, could cure some disease in the world that no one ever discovered before. And that passion could lead them to that over time that can help so many people. And there's so many incredible stories in the world of that really stuck out to me in a lot of ways. So that was like a big one that as I age gracefully as best I can with the longevity and biohacking fun. Um, yeah, it's just like, hey, like, how can I just embrace my weird? How can I embrace my really just care full on? And another one actually comes from human design that one of my mentors introduced me to many years ago. And understanding your type and everything without going too deep, it was just the thing that stuck out to me was my incarnation cross. And a big distinction that I learned from that was, my personal type, it's like I'm meant to share a lot of tidbits of information and resources and recommendations or whatever, and then allow others to have their own experience. It's one of the greatest freedoms in life. And to allow others to choose to utilize or wield that knowledge or not, right? And it's challenging when you care about someone and you try to help them in some way. And this also scales from personal, family, romantic relationships, whatever, to running a business and producing a product or a service or coaching that can help other people. It's releasing attachment to the outcomes and playing around with things, right? So I developed having a background kind of a science nerding and geek for those things, I created experimental frameworks. And originally I started in business and I applied it to health, and they work both ways. And I was like, I'm going to work out. And I got this goal for, building muscle or losing weight or whatever it might be. And I realized that like you start, you stop, some people fall off the wagon and you got to get back on, and habit formation, habit destruction, habit displacement, very interesting parts of psychology around this. But for me, and I learned helped a lot of my clients eventually in holistic biohacking, was designing experimental frameworks. There's less risk involved. It's a temporary commitment to do. And if you structure it right, it actually can turn into a lifelong habit, and you can get amazing results from that. So applying that in the business realm, for example, in that context, split testing. You can run a split test. It's one of my default things that when my team comes to me, like, hey, we're very collaborative. Bring your ideas. The sum of all is greater than the single individual. I have some good ideas, but not always the best. Some of my ideas flop and bomb, and some of them take off and are super successful. And I'm not the smartest guy in the room. And if I'm the smartest guy in a room, I better find a different room to be in. So when a team member brings something to me, I say, you know what? That's an interesting idea. Let's test it. And then we run a split test. And we just, handle the controls, and we just be like, hey, is this working better than that? And it's either going to get better, stay the same, or get worse. And with that simple framework, you can apply that to business, to health, to a lot of things, and just try things out. And the cool thing about experiments is you can choose to extend the timeline. So if you run it for 2 weeks and it's looking pretty interesting, maybe run it for another 2 weeks. And those 2 weeks can actually become years. And if it's like a healthy habit, going to the gym, yoga, mindfulness, meditation, whatever it might be, that habit may actually stick for life. And it's really fascinating how the brain is very tricky. It wants different things, and dopamine rushes and dopamine hits and everything too. But really a lot of optimizing life and business comes down to doing the hard things and embracing that. So my mentors along the way really taught me a lot of those things. From copywriters like the great Joe Sugarman, for example. I worked with him. He's got, basically started infomercials back in the day. He's the first guy to accept credit cards over the phone. Very interesting stories behind all that. And he had blue blocker sunglasses, the original blue blockers. It's kind of a trendy thing in biohacking nowadays. But he was the guy back in like the 80s and 90s, walking around the beach in Santa Monica with a microphone and an old VHS camera and just asking people to try on his glasses on a sunny day. And they're like, whoa, these are so cool, And he got a NASA technology for the lens, and it blocks the blue light, and he has the whole story. And he's one of the most incredible legendary marketers of all time, who a lot of people in the marketing and business world highly respect and learned a lot from. So working with him for the time I did so closely and directly was pivotal to hear his stories and how he told his stories and where he came from with that. And he's so much fun to hang out with in those ways where he'd tell a story and then you click with something sticks, something jumps out of it and sticks in your mind. You're like, I'm going to go try that. Right? So you go and you create these experiments and you just try them out. So that's another really amazing lens and framework that I think anyone can utilize. If you're listening to this right now, just ask yourself, what do I want to accomplish? And ideally what timeline? And, what are the things I need to do or not do? And just try it out and see how it is and ideally have fun with it. Even if it's a challenging thing like cutting sugar for a period of time or trying a new diet or changing, what you eat or you're removing allergens from your diet temporarily to feel better. And once you do and you feel that difference, the evidence leads to confidence. And that confidence then allows you to maintain that over time.
Yeah, I love that. Talking about, change and habits. So Atomic Habits is one of the first books I give every single client, right? And arguably, my job is to advise them on business and strategy and operations and team structure. But as a leader, you are trying to do something extraordinary. And so, ordinary isn't going to cut it. And I do really believe in the, evolutionarily, we're programmed to gravitate to the norm. And so who you surround yourself with is really important. We are wired for safety and our brain hasn't evolved fast enough to understand that things that feel scary aren't tigers that will kill you. All of that kind of stuff. And I think that really relates to what you're talking about. I often set people up with tools that I have found over the years of my own trial and error, either with myself or with clients, really help. And that's often like short term, look at it as an experiment, this much time, commit to it for that much time. Also like visual trackers. And I think a lot of it is around goals are great and achieving things is great, but underneath it all is really the identity, right?
100%.
Who is the person that has these things or does these things or achieves these things? What's your take kind of on that, and how does that, scientific method kind of fit in? Does that, am I crazy that those are pretty much
Not at all.
a similar approach? Yeah.
No, you're crazy brilliant is what you are. The identity shift, that is the key. A lot of people don't realize. And there's this amazing book a friend of mine wrote some years ago called The Alter Ego Effect. Highly recommended on this subject specifically. And it's just brilliant in how he wrote this and the stories he tells in there. And then he teaches you a really cool, simple process to apply to basically create an alter ego, to have the identity shift or the belief shift. Right? If anyone's ever studied NLP, for example, neuro-linguistic programming, not natural language processing, that's an AI thing. But we have to make those distinctions these days now. But the original NLP, like Richard Bandler style, one of my original mentors was Dr. Wyatt Woodsmall, who was Tony Robbins' first mentor, taught him the sharpshooter technique and all sorts of other wonderful things that Tony then used to go help a lot of people and continues to. And Dr. Wyatt was a professional NLP modeler, and he helped Richard Bandler and John Grinder formulate what we now know as the structure and framework of NLP and a lot of different therapeutic aspects. And in that whole process, like belief change, the identity change is the key. And when you identify as a person, who is a fitness-oriented person, you identify as that, you become that, you embrace that lifestyle. Now, this also connects in a fun way to Rene Girard, for example, and the theory of mimetics. And we are a species that loves to, basically mimic each other in some ways. So the environment shapes the organism, and we are social creatures. And so a lot of things we see around us in a certain area influence us. So that's why you go to some regions and everyone's playing volleyball. Well, they're all their bodies have adapted to playing volleyball, being in the sun, being grounded in the sand, being by the ocean, have the negative ions, right? All these things really help optimize their health. And you find that a lot of people are drawn to it. And if you move to an area like that for some time, you might want to try to play volleyball if you're interested in it. And all of a sudden you start getting the benefits. And the same is true for insert any other version here. So when you go through and you realize, okay, wait a minute, if I change my identity, if I change my belief to this, the alter ego effect is a really beautiful way to test that out. You can create a new persona, right? You can create, a new way to do this. Like, who is the person that accomplishes these things, right? If they need to get up early to go to yoga, right? And they go, oh, I struggle with waking up in the mornings. There are biohacks you can do. There's a lot of really cool things you can do to help wake up early if you're not a morning person in that way. But if you change your identity, to I'm a practitioner of yoga, and it's a lifetime commitment kind of a thing. Same as, fitness, this identity change. It's like I'm gonna have this vehicle, this biosuit. It's my one bio vehicle on spaceship Earth. And I really have to ideally take care of it if I want to, feel good and live great. And so in doing that, it's like when I made the mental shift early on, because I had an interesting thing with working out. I was in all the extreme sports, so I naturally worked out in that way through the activities of the sports. I didn't really train very much. I trained in like practicing what I was doing. And then when I started getting into the gym when I was younger, I would have one of two things happen. I would either get sick, my immune system would crash, and I'd get sick for a couple of weeks, or I'd get injured. My ligaments, tendons, joints. And that was actually for me a mineral deficiency, funny enough. So in that process, I'd go in there, I'd be like, oh yeah, I can push this weight. I can lift it heavier, I can do this. And my muscles are very strong genetically, so I can lift a lot of weight. But the white muscle, which is the tendons, ligaments, and joints, and cartilage, for example, they don't have a direct supply of blood flow. And if you shift the weight, if the muscle fatigues and the weight shifts to the tendon or the joint, well, that's a backup, but a little too much, and something's going to go wrong in the biomechanics of it. So dealing with that, I got out of it. And I got back into it, and I got out of it. I just was like, I can't do this. I'm not a gym person. I'm not a fitness person, right? But I love sports. And then when I started getting into the identity shifting belief change, I was like, wait a minute. I'm going to work out pretty much forever until I can't anymore, right? So why don't I just commit to it for life? I'm just going to go to the gym and do whatever I can, right? So you set the bar low at first, and then you start building the habits, you build the technique, you build the skills over time. And when I learned about like neuroplasticity and like neuromuscular connection, for example, I ran an experiment some years ago when I lived in Vancouver, where it was a muscle hacking experiment. I wanted to put on a bunch of muscle in a short period of time. A lot of people thought it couldn't be done and they couldn't do it naturally. I was like, I disagree. Intuitively, I feel like, and I've met people who told me stories where I'm like, I think this is possible. And so I designed a very intricate experiment for that. And I put on, a massive amount of muscle. I went from basically like 130-ish pounds lean, and I basically put on like 40 pounds of muscle in under 3 months. And everybody was like, that's impossible. That's insane. Nobody ever does that. And you talk to Tim Ferriss, he's done it himself in some ways. He's trained others to do it as well. And I did it all naturally. No steroids, no crazy stuff like that. It was just all natural stuff, right? I used natural herbs and different things, with growth factors like colostrum, for example, pine pollen, elk antler. Those are core stacks for supporting testosterone and HGH. You don't need steroids when you have what comes from a tree, or it comes from helping antlers grow on elk very rapidly. And I did floating at the time as well, so that was helping with recovery, body, mind, soul kind of recovery in that way, and increased my strength. If I floated before a workout, I could lift heavier, I could lift longer. If I floated after a workout, I recovered faster. I wasn't as sore. I was able to go back to the gym sooner, but still actually get the microtissue structure to heal faster, right? So in that process, I was like, okay, I can go through, I can play with this, I can hack it. But after doing that, I was like, you can really figure out how to dial it in for what you want to accomplish in the timeline. That identity shift, that belief change occurred. And I'm like, I'm just going to go to the gym forever. So it's just a natural part of life that I continue to do to maintain how I feel, what I do, and I don't have crazy, insane goals for that or anything, but I like running experiments. So that was a really incredible one to teach me it was possible. And the neuromuscular connection, to tie back to that, was when you put on a lot of mass quickly, it takes on average 6 to 8 weeks for the brain to wire up to that muscle to know how to use it. So I had this funny thing happen, and if you're listening in and you've built a lot of muscle, you know this. It's a really funny thing. I got super clumsy. And I come from a world of very precise sports, snowboarding, martial arts, gymnastics, acrobatics. Like precision really matters in form, technique, and landing things or not, right? And so I have really good motion and temporal awareness in time and space. But when I put on a lot of muscle in a short period of time, I was bumping into doorways and walls. I'd grab a glass out of the cupboard and I would crush it in my hand because I literally didn't know my own strength until my brain wired up to my muscle. So one of the takeaways from that is it takes time for certain things to set and settle, which you can then build upon that solid foundation from.
I love that. I want to extract two things from that and break them down a little bit for people listening. So the first one, and I have a saying, which I'm not going to go into all the stories and personal experiences that have got here, and you're probably the first person who could call bullshit on whether this saying makes sense. But I always say we're basically just meaty computers and you have to learn to program yourself. And
100%.
okay, I was like,
yeah. Yeah.
and I really think that that concept of identity is so fundamental. And like what you said, like the piece by piece, like in Atomic Habits, James Clear talks about, you know, get your socks on, get your socks and shoes on, get your socks and shoes on, and like get down to the street to catch a taxi or whatever mode of transport, get to the gym. And I actually really think that that concept is amazing. Like I have a rule for myself often with the gym of like, just get there. Like if you stretch and decide you don't want to work out, fine. Like never happens. But
Exactly.
no, like, but I really think that as you build, it's that all or nothing is where people struggle. And the reason I want to talk about identity and then identity lag, which was kind of, you're talking muscle and I'm talking identity, but is if you are not looking at yourself as this meaty computer, you can very much operate in these programs and habits that feel insurmountable. And yet, very quickly, you can build new habits that in a good way feel insurmountable, in the sense that you're like, this is just how I live now. And I think part of it is there are some where once you feel the benefits, it's hard to go back. And, you know, food, microbiome, stuff like that. You and I talk about this a lot with the recent detox I went through, right? Like I swung back and I was just like, this is awful. I don't want to live like this, you know, like, ugh. But also internally, and again, we won't have time to go into it, but like we are programmable. Like you don't eat sugar and whatever for a while, certain bacteria reduce and stop triggering your vagus nerve in your brain, and I'm probably misquoting, to crave that shit all the time. And so it is you know, often many of us find it surprisingly difficult to change, and yet it is also surprisingly easy if you approach it in the right way to build a new habit, which is a pillar of a new identity and a new way of life and a new foundation from which to achieve things.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you're on the right track with that so beautifully. And it's really great. If you're listening to this right now, pay attention to yourself and understand like what habit you want to create, right? And realize that there are people like James that have atomic habits. There's an amazing gentleman named BJ Fogg, a brilliant behavioral scientist. In one of the universities, he's written a few books out there and stuff too, but his whole specialty, he had a behavior change lab, essentially. I believe it's Stanford, possibly. May have to double check that on me, but you know, some great awesome university where he was basically like, hey, how can we help people change habits? And what about this? Like to create habits. And then he got into habit displacement and habit destruction. So he had a really great program I went through many years ago that taught me this new distinction layer that I then applied to coaching. I was like, oh, I'm going to try it out, right? And I just asked my clients, hey, you willing to try this new thing and see if it helps? And it was amazing how it did. So like you said, like putting your socks on, having your bag ready to go by the door, right? I have that for myself. I still do that to this day. I have everything ready. My yoga mat is dry and rolled up and in the bag and ready to go. All my stuff's like ready to rock and roll, so I can wake up, do my meditation, like get into the mindset, you know, do what I do in the mornings, my morning rituals, right? Get my mineral foundation set, my electrolytes, all the good stuff. And then from there, go into the practice. And then I can fully show up in that practice for myself, which is very powerful to do. And originally, starting out, habit creation is where a lot of people like fall short, because you try to start a new habit and it's hard to stick. There was another study they did where you hear that it takes 21 days to build a habit. You heard that one before? It's like interesting and it's part of the story, but it's not the full story. And the full story is, on average, it takes 67 days to build a habit. And some people it takes longer, and some people it takes shorter. 21 days is actually just laying the base neural lattice. It's just, you know, laying the foundation for that. But it's not solidified into a, you know, brushing your teeth or taking a shower kind of habit, which ideally most people have. So those are great for health too. And when you get in there and you realize, like, okay, it's hard to actually create a habit in some ways. It's easier to displace them. And there's a lot of cool ways people can do that. So if you understand, like, okay, cool, instead of trying to create all these new habits and destroy all these other habits simultaneously, that creates internal conflict, and the brain doesn't like that. So it usually is like, I'm going to default back to what feels comfortable, what feels safe, right? There's a really great quote from one of my favorite neuroscientists in a book called Iconoclast. An awesome read. And in there he says, the brain is fundamentally a lazy piece of meat. And it's just like, we have this incredible, you know, biocomputer in our skulls, right? operates everything on less than a 60-watt light bulb. Yet it consumes the majority of calories, right? A chess master can be sitting down playing a game, for 10, 12 hours, and they're burning more calories than an Olympic swimmer like Michael Phelps. So it's like you can burn 12,000 calories just sitting down, not moving, in a sedentary position, playing a game that is in your mind. So it just goes to show that we have these superpowers, and evolution is a lot stronger than we are. So again, less friction, more flow. How can we flow with the stream of evolution, with ourselves, and changing our habits in these ways? So we can identify what is the habit I want to create. Maybe it's one you want to destroy. The displacement I found was the high leverage key. How do I displace that? And one example is from an eating perspective, regardless of diets and everything. If you wake up in the morning and you have sugar or carbs or something like that first thing, like you said, to your point, the microbiome is going to feed on those sugars. And then guess what? Those gut bugs grow and they have more cells and they want to eat more sugar, right? So they're going to actually, get your body to try to go do more of those things. But if you wake up and you have protein in the morning, then that protein has a completely different effect on your blood sugar, your insulin function, and you're not going to crave as many other things. So instead of having, a delicious croissant with, whatever delicious, sweet thing on it, some delicious baked good, it's really good, it's really tasty. And a lot of people, they can work fine on that. But if you're really trying to change a habit in that regard, displace it. Have some eggs instead, have some steak, have some, whatever it might be for your choice. And if you start off with the protein, that's one part. Or some people do better with fasting, right? So play around with that. How do you displace that? And it's easier to not eat. And it's also easier to just change what you eat, like protein versus sugar. And that displacement will then inevitably trickle down. That waterfall effect will then influence your decision making for the day, your energy for the day, how you show up and what you do and where you go, how you play, how you work, whatever it might be. It'll change how you interact with your family, with, if you have kids, your partner or something like that. It's going to change everything in your life by changing one simple thing, right? And that's sort of, there's a really beautiful concept I want to mention here called the trim tab effect. And that one we can get into if you like, because that helps so many people dial this in. Have you heard about the trim tab effect before?
I feel like I've probably heard about it from you, but let's dive into it, and then I think I have a follow-up question, but let's get into that first.
Perfect. Let's get back to that for sure. So the trim tab effect is really easy to understand. If you think about a big boat like the Titanic in the ocean, right? The ocean's pretty powerful. Big boats are pretty big and pretty heavy. Floating along the water, you need a big rudder to move the boat. Well, you need a lot of pounds per square inch leverage force to actually move that giant ship in the water and be able to turn on a dime. So that was a big engineering problem in sailing and boating for many, many years, generations. Until some genius, I did look it up at one point, not remember his name right now, but give credit where credit's due to whoever came up with this brilliant feat of engineering. This guy was like, hey, I'm an engineer, I'm going to figure out how to make this easier. And the ocean's very powerful. So what if we were to put a little rudder on top of the big rudder? And if you have a little rudder there, you need a small wheel, one person can manage it. They turn the one wheel, it turns the little rudder at the top where there's, less surface tension, there's less energy there. What happens is the power of the ocean starts going over the rudder, and the power of the ocean naturally moves the rest of the giant rudder. So that trim tab, that's what that was called. It's called, and still used on boats today. It was that trim tab effect. It's like, where's the trim tab effect in your life? Like, where can you apply the trim tab effect in your life to change a habit, to, display something, to destroy a habit in some ways, right? And one funny one I mentioned today to a friend on the beach, actually, that is for a lot of people very valuable these days. If you get caught scrolling social media, Instagram or anything else like that, it's all hacking your mind through blue light. There's a lot of patents on it. Really great book by Nir Eyal, who wrote a book called Hooked, all about that, because he helped engineer this technology. And in that, a simple thing we can do nowadays on pretty much any phone, any smartphone, you can just tell it, hey, turn it to grayscale. If you turn it to grayscale, it removes the colors, and it changes the blue light. And then what happens is it stops hacking your brain, and it stops sucking you into that. So then you actually become a master of your technology instead of the technology becoming a master of you. And those are trim tab effects, where every single person that has done that gets the same effect because it's biology, and it's very consistent over time. So ask yourself in any aspect of life, business or health, where's the trim tab? Like, how can I apply the trim tab, leverage framework here to naturally move me in the direction of who I want to become, who I choose to be, or what I choose to build?
So I love the example you gave about, you shift what you eat in the morning, it shifts your energy, your decision making, how you interact with people in your life throughout your day. If someone is thinking like, I want to make change. There's numerous things in my life that are not aligned with where I would like them to be. I don't think that my relationship at home is where I want it to be. I'd like my business to grow faster. I'd like to be, fitter, whatever. How do you go about just looking to find that first place to focus on?
Excellent question. Yeah. That right there, Alex, is a very specific example of you applying exactly what we just talked about. That's you applying the trim tab high leverage effect to this conversation to help get to that point. Because by asking that question, you kind of skip a whole bunch of things and go to like, okay, out of 1,000 things I can do, what's the one thing that has the highest degree of probability of success in me achieving what I want as my desired outcome? So how do you do that? There's a few ways, of course. It depends. Pick your context, right? So orient yourself on the map. The map is not the territory. But it's like, okay, where am I now? And then you'd be like, okay, where do I want to go, right? And if you're plane, train, automobile, usually you have a starting point, and you have a destination where you want to get to, and it could take a certain amount of time to do that. Now there are ways to get there faster, and that's sort of where the hacking part comes into biohacking, right? You can do that, and something that's not the best to do. But ideally, what is something in your life that if you could wave a magic wand and change it to what you wanted it to be, that maybe it's not right now, how would that affect your life? And then literally use a simple writing exercise. Just write it down. If I, for example, if I lose weight, if I have weight challenges, there's a thing where for every pound of fat loss in the body, you actually take, anywhere from like 4 to 8 pounds of torque off the knees. So a lot of people that have a lot of weight on them have a lot of knee challenges. And if they just lose a few pounds, guess what? Their knees feel better. So if losing weight is something that is important to you, for a number of reasons, it's a very powerful motivational driver. It's aligned with evolution. And when you're healthier, you're happier. And when you're happier, you tend to be a better person and more compassionate, more generous, more kind, more productive, more focused, all the really great benefits that come along with that. So if health is there, I found that when we transform our health, our mindset, and our physiology, that then leaks into every other aspect of our life. So I typically would suggest to people, start with your mindset, start with your health. And they're a two-way street. You can change your mind and change your body. You can change your body and change your mind. So if you start there, it can help in every other aspect. Because in business, and I've been through this myself, building many things over the years, is I've been through burnout multiple times. And it's brutal. If you're listening to this right now and you're a builder yourself and you built some things and you've burned out, you know what I'm talking about. It's not fun. It's not fun for you or anyone you care about or anyone that you're attempting to serve. And it actually holds you back in a lot of ways. Takes you off the board, right? And the game is like, finite versus infinite games. I like playing games that I can keep playing pretty much forever, right? There's a few fun ones that are short to play. But at the same time, like, how am I going to be able to keep going and have the stamina, the endurance, the perseverance to be able to overcome the hard things, overcome the obstacles and the challenges, reduce the friction, and increase the flow. And if you start thinking in different ways like that, you start just orienting your natural neurology towards solutions, right? And we're built to figure that out. If you're hungry, your brain's going to focus on seeking out food, not seeking out how to do something else, right? So you take care of that first, and that is a foundation to help you step up to the next point, whatever it might be. If it's in your business, a lot of times in business, simpler is better. Go for elegance. It's like, was it Einstein who said, make things as simple as possible, but no simpler? There's a lot of wisdom in that. From the automation and AI world now too, it's like a lot of people try to build crazy agents and insane automations and everything. I played around with that too, but the more complex that they grow, the more variables you have to consider. And we have a finite energy source, right? Glucose and calories. Like, eventually your brain's going to burn out. You need to rest or eat or recover. And when you're building something super complex, it does go beyond what the human mind is capable of, no matter how brilliant you are. You'd be the most brilliant person in the world on that. But when you build a lot of automations, it gets clunky and things trip over. And if one thing fails, the whole system crumbles. It's like a house of cards that falls down. So the most brilliant automations in the world in any business or any technology typically are the simplest ones. So when you go through and you figure out, okay, if I could change one thing about my health to feel better and perform better, what would it be? And you ask yourself that question. That's how you find that answer. Add that to your business. And if there's one thing I could wave a magic wand to do and change in my business, what would it be? Is it more traffic? Is it more leads? Is it, better team members? Is it, better designers? If it's a product, is it, engineering or formulation? If it's a supplement, coaching practice, like how can you reach more people? You go one-to-one or one-to-many, right? A lot of these interesting questions start arising. And a really fun one to tie into this to help identify your passions, kind of draw things from within you. It's actually like the Latin root of education. It's like educo or educare, which is to draw from within. And so I love these exercises that help draw from within. And there's one that I learned from Michael Gelb many years ago. Actually was stemmed from Da Vinci. And it's Da Vinci's 100 questions. So all you do is you get a pen and paper, you get a nice place, just sit down, focus, block out some time, and just write down 100 questions without stopping. That's it. No holds barred, no limitations, no rules, nothing. The only thing is write down 100 questions and don't stop. And when you do that, that starts to help understand within yourself where that focus is. Helps you kind of triangulate and zone into, wait a minute, what do I care about? What actually matters, right? And with that, you can start understanding where should I, direct my finite attention and focus on a regular basis. And little things add up to be big things over time, right? Linear versus exponential. So that's another concept to play with there too. So identify what is it for you that's going to transform your life. I will give you a bit of a shortcut, super hint. Health, mental, and physical is one of the highest leverage areas that anyone can devote a little bit more time and energy to because it pays dividends. It's incredible what happens when you can produce more energy and you're able to sleep better and you're able to run faster, jump higher, play with your kids longer, whatever it might be, right? It adds in every aspect of your life and business.
Yeah. The core processor of your everything else you're doing. Okay. So I want to come back to the muscle experiment. Mm-hmm. You said you put on so much muscle so quickly, it took time for your brain to know how to use it. Yep. And I want to stress test this concept because identity lag is something that I sometimes work with my clients on. And I absolutely have experienced, and there's a million and one ways that you can handle that. But it's just the concept that often we see ourselves as a past version, not as our current capabilities, personality, whatever it might be. And the way that someone who met us today would see us and describe us is very different from our own perception. And what I'm curious for you, as someone who has grown so quickly, done so many things, made so many, I'm going to use a really common word now, like quantum leaps, but in health, in business, in knowledge, is success figuring out how to overcome the identity lag and have it be a shorter lag, or is it ignoring it and just pushing forward
and doing anyway? Right?
Yeah, just getting after it regardless.
I think it depends on the person. The whole concept of success is very, very interesting, and everyone has a different way of going about it, but it is an art and a science. And it's about what motivates you, what do you care about, right? If you identify what your current identity is, you can create a new identity to shift towards in some ways. That definitely helps. But why are you doing what you're doing? And ideally doing this exercise from a place of non-judgment. No shame, no guilt, no nothing. Take other people out of it, what other people think of you, how other people judge you, whatever. Ideally just practice eliminating all of that. A really fun one that I did growing up as a kid that helped me sort of in the 3D material space of things. I kind of just came up with this on my own. And I was just it was helping me understand what I wanted to invest my money in. Right? So if I wanted a motorcycle, I'll give you the motorcycle example because I did this. I was I love going fast. I did racing and stuff early on. And I was I love speed. I love going fast. I wanted a sport bike. And I wanted a Ninja, Kawasaki Ninja at the time. And I was I was a ninja in real life. And I want to be a ninja on a bike, right? How do I go about accomplishing and achieving that goal of getting that Ninja? Well, it costs so much money. You go through, you can buy the bike. But then I got to a place of why do I want the bike? Is it for me or is it for other people? And it's okay either way. There's no judgment here. But I ran this exercise in my mind. It's a mental simulation. I basically just strip everyone else off planet Earth momentarily. And I'm just if I'm the only person on planet Earth and I have a motorcycle, will I enjoy riding this motorcycle and having a lot of fun riding it if no one's around to see me? And at the time when I was younger and I went through this, it helped me understand that at the time, the motorcycle wasn't just for me. It was fun to ride and go fast. But it was actually more for how others perceived me. I realized it was something that I wanted to be the person that was on the motorcycle that other people saw, and alter their thinking, their perception of me in some way that would help me get to some result. And typically, from the evolutionary lens, it all goes back to survival and reproduction. So if I'm trying to pick up girls or something, well, if I'm, on a bike, oh, that guy's going fast. He's a badass or whatever. I realized, wait a minute, that doesn't seem aligned with who I am and my purpose of where I'm going in life, even at that time. So it was a fun exercise to go through. And you can apply it to anything, physical stuff, whatever. But it's like, what do I want to create here? Like, what do I want to accomplish here? And it's okay. If you love to ride, it's amazing. Get a bike. It's awesome. But it comes with a lot of other stuff you don't notice, you don't think about. And then when you go through the exercise, you realize, oh, there's actually more to this, So that's a really fun one to go through and help. And the identity lag part, it does take time to build, right? So the small steps lead to bigger steps over time, sort of that linear versus exponential reference. And if you can just keep at it, sometimes you need to just dig your heels in and get it done, and that's okay. But learning to distinguish the difference between that and a really great book on this is Seth Godin's The Dip. It's a really tiny book. You can read it in an afternoon. But he talks about failure and success in these ways. And it was a really great helpful one for me to read at the time, because it was like, should I, stick with building this business that I'm struggling through, or should I pivot to something else? A lot of entrepreneurs go through this in different ways. A lot of builders do. And going through and reading that book gave me permission to fail. It gave me permission to give up and not feel bad about it. And it was amazing because at that time I was trying to build a business that was in neuromarketing. So it actually was, using brainwave headsets to read people's brainwaves to optimize marketing and doing like site conversion rate optimization, but based on brainwave feedback. I was super geeked into it. I loved it. Got some great results with it. I was talking to investors about it and everything. But the interesting thing was it was a bleeding edge idea, not a leading edge idea. The money goes to leading edge. Bleeding edge is a little too risky. And at that time, it was super risky. So I was like, should I stick with this or should I try something else? And after I read The Dip, I was like, I love this. I'm passionate about it. I believe there's something here. It was a little too far ahead of its time. And when I accepted that, I was like, you know what? I'm going to put this on the back burner, let it go. Then synchronicity just became flowing in abundance, and I met other people and other connections, other opportunities, and it pivoted me naturally. The trim tab effect, it pivoted me as the ship into a new path that led me to building another company that I grew and scaled in record time compared to what I was struggling with in the neuromarketing company, right? So that's a really helpful one to play around with and be okay with it. Ideally make mistakes, break things, figure it out. But just understand like your own risk tolerance, your risk thresholds. You hear about investing a lot and everything too. But time is the most valuable resource we all have that we expend every day that we haven't figured out really well how to get back in like exponential ways yet. We could get there with longevity and AI and things, we'll see. But money you can make. You can make it left, right, and center. You can do different things. You can fail and go back to it again. And just you get your personal, things out of the way for that and just try stuff. If you're passionate about it and you want to do it, go for it. But also be aware of the feedback and make sure the feedback is supporting you on that path. Because you can, build something you're very passionate about, but if no one cares, no one's going to buy it, no one's going to invest in it, you're not going to go very far, right? But if you identify like the ikigai of, trifecta of like where you are, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can make a lot of money at in a business context, you create value. Like money is a byproduct of value creation. So if you identify that for yourself in your business, then you can really see that feedback loop occur, and then that will actually help you overcome the identity lag. Because a lot of people have the imposter syndrome, right? I've had it myself in different ways. I'm sure I will at some point again too. And I'm okay with that because, you got to fake it till you make it in some ways, right? But when you do make it, you're like, okay, wait a minute, what do I do next? And when you go through that to basically look at that feedback loop of that information, and the evidence leads to confidence. And I think everyone's different in how they define that, but define what is success to you? How will I know I'll be successful when, right? And just figure out what that is for you. Dean Jackson, a brilliant marketer, had a simple one. He's like, I know I'm successful when I don't have an alarm clock to wake up to. I can just wake up naturally. And to this day, he has no alarm clocks in his house. There's not a clock anywhere. He has no idea what time it is unless he needs to. And it's really brilliant because, that's how he knows he's successful. And he's engineered his life and his business around that to support that. Again, simple, elegant, trim tab, very high leverage.
Yeah, and I think if you don't have a definition, then also you're like, well, how do I know if I'm successful? How do I build confidence as the outcome of that hard work. I often think of imposter syndrome as a double-edged sword. I think it can really drive you to excel, and I think it can also hold you back depending on how you kind of handle it. But you talked about going fast and being on the motorcycle, and you also talked about time, right? As this resource, we can't multiply it the way we can with other resources. You once told me that you engraved your first iPod with a phrase, and I might be misquoting you, but I think it was "Live today as if there's no tomorrow."
You
And
got
I'm
it right.
curious first of all, what is the story behind that quote and that time in your life? That's just my own morbid curiosity, but I feel like it's going to be a good story. And how does that kind of tie in a little bit to what we're talking about, which I would say is kind of know when to hold them, know when to fold them, right? Like know when to like push harder and problem solve, and know when to change course.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you got the quote right. So awesome on that. It was great. And it was really amazing because that is when they first got the iPod, you can engrave stuff on there and people are engraving their names or phone numbers. Hey, if it's lost, return to here or whatever, which is smart. That's great. Cool function.
I also engraved my version. Carpe
Yeah,
Diem.
but it's like,
It's on every Apple product I think I've ever owned.
yeah, it's like, I love quotes. I love motivational stuff. There's so many of those things, those little tidbits along the way that help motivate you, inspire you, whatever. Some people are driven by that. Some people aren't. I find a lot of value in it. And also the actual origin of quotes and what full quotes are. There's a lot of things that are in the nomenclature that people say in one way that if you understand the rest of it, it's completely different, right? And one I think that applies to a lot of builders here, and I'll get to the story of my quote with that. Is you ever heard the term jack of all trades?
Yes, that was what I was hoping you were going to say.
So jack of all trades. Let's play a game here. When someone says that, oh, jack of all trades, what's the general conception of that? Like, what do you think when someone mentions a jack of all trades?
I think it mostly gets applied to like, you're not an expert, you don't excel in one thing. Right? I'm going to let you lead this. I have so many thoughts. I know the whole quote, and
You do know it?
Yes. Yeah.
Ah, okay, beautiful. I love that you know it. Not a lot of people know it, but it's super fun and it's really great to know. So a jack of all trades is a master of none. That's what people always go to, but they leave it there. They just cut it there. The rest of it is but oftentimes better than a master of one.
Love it. Yeah.
Right?
And I
It
think
completely changes. It completely inverts the understanding and the meaning of that, right? And there's plenty of examples of other ones, but that one is a really great just focal point. You're like, whoa, that actually changes the game entirely. Because same thing. I grew up being multi-passionate, multi-talented. I was into a lot of different things. I was just a voracious learner and student of life in different ways. And everybody was like, you have to focus. You have to stay on this one track. And it didn't feel right. It didn't resonate with me. I was just like, no, I want to do more. I want to learn more. And the culmination of that is who we become over time. And we evolve. It's the evolution, right? The weaving of all those threads of destiny, so to speak, all throughout. And embracing that weird, like I talked about at the beginning, was like, I'm into a lot of different stuff. But what's cool is many of those things apply to each of the areas in different domains of life. And they've, helped and supported success in various ways I define it over time. And they continue to. And they continue to build that. And it becomes more valuable. Like with time, you mentioned, is like we're time travelers. We really are. We have the ability as a species with our brains to project ourselves in the future, to project ourselves in the past, and to be here now, as the great Ram Dass would say, right? And meditation, mindfulness, breath work, yoga, these things really help us be here now. Physical fitness workouts, really great for that. And then there's a lot of really beautiful value to like our prefrontal cortical activity where we can project ourselves into the future and make plans. We can think about engineering and building things and then go build it, right? It's part of what makes our species the current apex predator, apex species, right?
Non-stop, right?
Yeah.
Double-edged sword.
Yeah. But if you get, typically like, for example, anxiety, depression, right? A lot of people struggle with that or experience at different times. I have in my own ways. And when I learned more about it from, just the brain science perspective was anxiety, oftentimes is being stuck in the future. It's projecting out. And then depression typically stuck in the past. And that's the beauty of Ram Dass and meditation in these aspects is if you be here now, everything happens in the now, right? It also happens in the now. And also it's very interesting because technically speaking, our brains process reality at about like 8 seconds, lag. I don't know if you've seen that study they did on that. But basically, if the sun were to go supernova and wipe us all out, it would happen. And 8 seconds later, we would realize it happened. There's an 8-second lag in reality. So what we believe is the now in real time, it's a bit of a mind trip. It's a really interesting
Oh
mind trip.
God.
And
Yeah.
it's really interesting because, okay, cool, we are time travelers, literally. Our perception of time is very malleable. And yet, Stephen Hawking dedicated a lot of his life to figuring time out. And even, before he passed away, he couldn't figure it out. He's like, no, time is this arrow that kind of keeps going in this direction from a physics perspective. Yeah, it gets warped around black holes and some other space stuff, which is fun. But from a human perception, like, how's it useful for us? If you're dealing with any depression, maybe just ask yourself, like, what am I trying to learn from the past? And that'll help direct your mind towards solutions to come back to the present. And what other practices can like bring you to the present? Do more of those. Then if you're stuck in the future and you have a lot of anxiety, what are you considering for? What are you calculating for? Because very smart individuals tend to deal with a lot of anxiety. It's a
Everything.
double-edged sword. Yeah. So when you realize that you can change that, you can play with that, you can actually have fun with it, and you can bring yourself back to the now, and you learn to project yourself in the future when is needed and come back to here and now as a base. You can go back in the past and appreciate, reflect, or learn from things. And you come back to the present as the base. And you can play with that, like embrace your inner time traveler, I say, right? And when you learn that as a skill, you lessen anxiety and you lessen depression and you increase happiness, joy, productivity, focus, flow, right? And one of the beautiful things about evolutionary sciences, psychology and biology, Dr. David Buss, shout out to him. I love his work, highly recommend it. Really is just incredible to understand that, why we do those things. It's because we're built for a time that no longer exists. Our biology evolves at a very slow pace compared to the exponential of technological innovation. And so our brains and our bodies have a really hard time, speaking of lag, we have a really hard time catching up to the now in terms of technology and how to adapt to it. So, still some people born with tails. It took a really long time for us to not, have tails anymore, but, there's still a few that are. But
Such a
that
cool
course of
example.
evolution took a really long time to dial in to where most people don't have tails anymore, right? So when you understand that context, you can be okay with it. You can kind of breathe a sigh of relief, like, oh, okay, all right, the world is crazy. Things are moving fast.
We're so easily hijacked by technology, right? Like we're just not equipped to handle it from a biology point of view, right?
We are the most hackable species there is. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And there's a lot of profit to be made out of hacking biology.
Yeah.
So we got to defend against a lot of that.
We'll come back to the hacking. But I love what you said. I want to come back for those listening, the quote that you chose, I love, right? Jack of all trades, master of none, often better than a master of one. And, the quote that I asked you about and kind of my version, which I don't know if they're the same, but I'm going to say carpe diem is the thing that's always on everything. It's on every technology. It's tattooed. It's everywhere. And those are things that I think are really interesting because, again, they're often double-edged swords. They're often things that can be interpreted. And I'd love your take on this because I think of the master of all trades part. I am somebody who, when I work with my clients, I talk about like your superpower, which I think a lot of people would say your zone of genius, right? But I call it your superpower because I think it's an intersection, and it's often an intersection of jack of all trades and master of one. It's often where, because I think a lot of value, a lot of what makes extraordinary people, and often the people that we hear about, the headline people, the front page people, they have stacked skills in a unique way that has created a unique value, right? And we all have some version of that. And so, for my client, I'm like, what is the combination of skills that makes you incredible and makes you so valuable to your organization, and how do you spend more time doing that, right? That's like the cheat code. And then I talk about cheat codes and environment, whatever, all the ways you get into flow, the ways you do your work best, whether you're alone with people, whatever. But I think, for me, I know I am incredibly a jack of all trades. Consulting was like constantly being sold as an expert in something you had never done before and having to fucking figure that out. No wonder I was stressed out. No wonder I burned out. I've been through burnout a few times. Like that level of intensity and stress and high stakes is very challenging, but it gave me exposure to an absolute breadth of companies, industries, contexts, business models, operating models, ways to do it terribly, ways to fix it, all of that. And then at the same time, I've had the opportunity to develop a depth in certain areas. And for me, combining that with a little bit of childhood trauma and, hypervigilance, which lets me read people really quickly and really well, is what makes me unique and incredible at what I do, and how I've ended up doing something that I believe I'm made to do and made for, and all of the paths have led here. What's kind of your perspective on that? I guess I'll give you the Carpe Diem one too. I think Carpe Diem could be like, fuck it, seize the day, enjoy, don't worry about anything. Or it could be, what is the most important thing for you to do today based on what's most important to you and what you want to achieve? And those could arguably be the same, but are probably different paths for your day.
Typically.
And I'm wondering about you take this wherever you want it, frankly, but what's kind of your interpretation, or maybe am I aligned with kind of the live today as if there's no tomorrow? Is that a, fuck it kind of thing? Or is that a don't hold back, go for the gold?
Yeah, a little bit more on that last part. It's a mix. Yeah. So one of the things was just huck it. In snowboarding, we used to have this term, you just huck it, right? You just build a big jump, and you have a big thing to clear, do a crazy trick or whatever. And thankfully, I grew up in a beautiful small mountain that had a lot of powder snow, so I could take a lot of risks and not get as hurt in most cases. Most of the injuries I had came from parks, snow parks and stuff with hard ice, right? So I broke my neck and my back snowboarding. Is a very pivotal, life-changing kind of experience there. But the live today as if there's no tomorrow was very much a sort of reminder to be in the present moment, and also to go for it, to go for the gold, right? Yeah. Being in competitive sports, there's a lot of stuff. I had to be better than everyone else. I had to do bigger, better tricks or whatever. I had a very interesting, unique entry into that, whereas a lot of people are competitive in the sense that I have to be better than the other to win. I have a different view on that, and I've kind of had it since I was young, and I've kept it all the way through life, which is I'm always competing against myself. So of course in competition you're competing against others. And I learned this in a very interesting, organic way, where having a background in martial arts and gymnastics, acrobatics, and then being in snowboarding, it would bleed into things, just the body mechanics of everything. So when I wanted to do a regular spin, like a 360, 540, 720, 900, I just wanted to spin around on the snowboard and land, right? Just degrees of rotation. I had a problem with that, where my shoulder would drop. And if my shoulder would drop, I would go cork, which means I would go sideways, or I'd go inverted and I would flip with spins. And because I had the sort of physical prowess to do it, I would oftentimes land crazy things. And then what was funny was everyone was cheering for me when I did some crazy thing they'd never seen before back then, because there wasn't, it was very early on in the snowboarding days. And I would be disappointed in myself. This is a very interesting perspective. And when I go to competitions and started competing, I would try, I'm like, you know what? The judges really love, a clean 720 off of this particular feature, and I'm gonna do a clean 720 on that with this grab, right? That was my plan going into it. And then I would go and I'd hit the jump full speed, I'd pop off the lip, I'd throw the 720, I'd cork it, or I'd go inverted. I'd either do a cork spin sideways, or I'd go inverted. I'd do, a roadie or a misty, depending on if it was a front or back flip. And when I did that, everyone, the crowd went nuts. And then at the end, the judges put up their scores, and then boom, I win a competition. But I'm literally at the end of the run, my final run, and I was so mad at myself. I was just so disappointed. I was like, I went cork on that one. I went inverted, And thankfully I pulled it together and I landed it, right? But still, it was a really interesting, experience to go through that. And then I realized, well, they like it, and they're giving me gold medals, and sponsors are giving me stuff, and they're paying me money, and they want to send me around the world to do things and train for the Olympics or whatever, right? So it worked in my favor counterintuitively, and it was a very interesting experience in that. So live today as if there's no tomorrow was really just be fully present, give it your all, go for the gold, try it, right? We have the fear that comes up, fear is the mind killer, from Dune, for example. It's a beautiful one, because a lot of times the imposter syndrome, everything else, oftentimes comes from fear. And again, going back to evolutionary lens, looking through that, survival and reproduction are typically, a lot of roads all lead to that parking lot of sorts. And you understand that they're here to protect us. Our fear is here to help us. It's just if we lean into it too much, it holds us back. And then you have other people where they seem to have no fear, right? Alex Honnold, for example, free climbing, the movie Free Solo, which is, an amazing, documentary to watch. Free climbing with no safety harnesses or anything else. It's puts you on the edge of your seat, gets your heart pumping, and you're going, your adrenaline's flowing. there's extremes, right? So I think it brings up another valuable thing. If you're listening to this right now, I find a spectrum analysis to be very, very helpful. Looking at everything through a spectrum. In astrology, you have a sign, and you're kind of born. You got to learn the skills and talents of that sign, and you have a spectrum of like unevolved to evolved, and you can master certain things. You have a new skill you want to pick up. You start not knowing how to do it. Driving stick shift in a car, for example. Like, you don't know how to do it at first. You got to grind some gears and burn out a clutch or two, and then you figure it out, right? You develop the skill. Working out at the gym, you go in there and you might lift too heavy, you might get injured, like I experienced, and you realize technique really matters a lot, and understanding to pace yourself in it, which is challenging for high performers and A players, A-type personalities. We always want to push it as hard as we can. We want to live today as if there's no tomorrow, right? We want to give it our all in that process. And so when you develop that wisdom over time, that wisdom of distinction and discernment, and asking yourself, like, is this fear? What is this? And how is it helping me? I find that really useful. Is like, how is this fear trying to keep me safe, to keep me alive, right? If you're, when I'm on a snowboard and I'm atop a cliff and I'm about to drop, 40, 60 feet, whatever it might be, there's a bunch of rocks, like it's a very dangerous situation to be in. There's a cool distinction that ties into this. I learned from my friends at the Flow Genome Project, Jamie Wheel and Stephen Kotler, amazing guys, by the way, great books. They taught me the distinction that I was not an adrenaline junkie, like people told me I was growing up, that I'm a flow junkie. And that made all the difference. Because standing atop that cliff about to drop in and to jump into the air and just like fly and hopefully land and not bail, then, I would have this feeling a lot of performers have in different ways. And there's this moment where things shifted, like everything got quieter. My eyes got sharper. I could see clearer. I could see the snowflakes, the shapes of the snowflakes clearer. Distractions went away, and it was this really beautiful, peaceful space. And I knew that was the moment to drop in. And sometimes I'd sit there for, 5-10 minutes, sometimes 20, if it was a big thing. You really like, I could, break myself off here if I mess this up. There's a lot at stake. And the stakes really help dial in that focus. The higher the stakes, higher the risk, higher the reward in a lot of cases. And then I would feel this intense resistance and struggle, which is the first state of flow states, first of the 4 stages. And somehow I'd biochemically reduce the cortisol and get through that. And I would feel this peaceful calm and this clarity. And I knew it was time. And I would stand up, and I would turn my board, and I would drop in towards the cliff, and I would, jump. I'd leap, and hopefully the powder net appears down below. And oftentimes it did, and it was really great because getting into that, I got addicted to that flow state. And so I love to ride and to jump and to spin and to flip and do these fun things, being in nature, being with my friends. That whole experience helped understand that, like, fear is there to protect us in a lot of ways, and it can also hold us back greatly. So feel the fear and do it anyway. You've heard from, I don't know who to give the credit to, but someone said it first, and it's a great one, right? And, courage is, acting. It's not, the eradication of fear. It's acting in the face of it, right? So if you have the courage to do something that's hard, that's challenging, that, might have a lot of risk associated with it, again, assess your risk tolerance and push the limits on it, but not too far. Keep it within reason. Know your limits, stay within it. Sometimes push the envelope.
Yeah, there's so many things you brought up that I want us to dig into. I love the distinction you made, because I've often been categorized as an adrenaline junkie, or like, oh, you do really violent sports, because I did, martial arts and rugby. And I love that you brought up also the like better than yourself and that like self-discipline. And you didn't quite touch on it, but like excitement versus nervousness. So these are all things that I've experienced in my athlete career as well. I was extremely hard on myself. Like there were moments where like I just couldn't get past something that wasn't as I thought it needed to be when I was, honestly still quite young. Like I'm thinking, it's probably 12, 13, 14, 15 years old as an athlete at, very high level. And I would just, really tear myself apart. And at the same time, I never remember feeling really fear. And I had people in my life who would reflect this to me. Like they were like, oh, I dabbled in this sport, but I would spend my whole time being sick in the bathroom with nerves. And you're just out here, doing it cool as a cucumber, a little emotionally shut down. That's a different podcast. But I've read obviously since then, because I'm a big neurobiology nerd as well. My first degree is in psych. I love how our brain works. I never thought it'd come back around to how much I read. All the people you just stated, I read, like Kotler's books, love it. So I'm curious. I want to make sure that people are listening to this and getting tangible takeaways. But I think the things that make incredible athletes, incredible performers, is really the same thing in business. It is the self-awareness. It is figuring out how to tap into drive instead of fear, or having fear drive you. And I'm curious because, we've both been in both worlds. What translated more easily and maybe what didn't? And are there things that you have understood in order to bring that, okay, it's great to hold yourself to a standard, and you need to understand what delivers results. It's important to feel to assess a situation and then translate that into drive and excitement, not fear that holds you back. It is adrenaline is one thing, but flow state is productive. Like, that's my best way I can summarize all the things. Are there reflections you've had, given that you have been able to really achieve extraordinary results in both athletic and business realm?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One is, I got to give credit to human design, system of human design. I don't get too geeky on it, but just it helped me understand myself at a much deeper level. I actually kind of explained a lot of my life growing up, and I was wondering about a lot of different things, why this, why that. And it really is a beautiful system to help me understand how I make decisions different ways. It's designed to be more of a decision-making engine than a personality kind of a thing. You can go that way with it. But when I understood that one thing that applies to competitive sports, business, health, etc., it's sort of like I have this aspect which is related to David versus Goliath battles. And I look at this really interesting repetitive theme in businesses that I choose to be a part of, to support, to grow, scale, exit, and to build myself, build with others. And in that, I was like, why do I take on these David versus Goliath battles? What is this about me going on? I just didn't know. Like, a lot of times I wouldn't know to get into it. I got into the health space, right? You're going against big pharma. You're going against the food industry, big food. There's a lot of money, there's a lot of power in those regards that are, trying to keep their businesses afloat and profit and do their things. And there's a lot of stuff I disagree with in those realms, and it goes against, optimal health and biology in a lot of ways, plain and simple. So then I go on to, let's say, my vape company. I created the world's healthiest organic, e-juice for e-cigarettes with organic nicotine and, sea algae, medicinal herbs as a replacement for petroleum products and synthetic products that are, harming a lot of people. Smoking, I grew up with asthma, right? And, in restaurants and bars and things. And, it was really challenging. I overcame it by snowboarding. Funny enough, hiking mountains and snowboarding helped me heal my asthma naturally, and reducing allergens for me, like gluten and dairy. And really going around to it is like, okay, if I understand, the high leverage things we're talking about here, we're going to see, like, how can we get where we want to go in the least amount of time, effort, energy as possible. And understand, like, if we keep finding ourselves in these situations, my vape juice company was going against big tobacco. It's a big industry. And it was very challenging in a lot of ways. And, the health industry in different ways too, we're going against these big energies. I didn't know what I was getting into. It wasn't like, I'm going to do this. Oh, there's a Goliath, I'm going to go fight it. I didn't see that. I didn't know it. I just wanted to feel better. I want to help other people feel better at the same time. And doing that, then you would bump into these big behemoths in a lot of ways. And they don't like it when you start taking away from their profit, the bottom line. So it's a very interesting, bigger conversation. But the main point here is understanding that about myself, that I'm naturally drawn to those kinds of things. It's nothing wrong with me. It's just that I naturally was attuned to that. I was like, okay, I can go with that, right? And I can understand how to navigate that more intelligently for how I want to live and what I want to do. Again, higher leverage thinking, more systems thinking, right? If you can create a system that, makes the old system obsolete, it's kind of a cool thing to do, right? I think it was, either Einstein or Buckminster Fuller, one of those two to give him credit for. And really just understanding yourself in that dynamic of being the hard charger, pushing yourself to the nth degree, but also giving time for recovery. Recovery is key. One of the things in biohacking is most of us are overworked and under-recovered, leading to burnout and things too. And being okay with that, Give yourself time to recover. Do what you need to do to refill your batteries, refill your energy, more mitochondrial energy, right? Whatever it might be, and being okay with that. But also going for it, identifying like what matters to you, like what are you here to do, right? There's a really great book, I think it's called Die Empty. I don't know if you read that one. Fantastic though, and the whole thing is just like how can you just get everything out of you in the world. If you're a builder, we're wired this way, right? There's a reason for this. We are builders, and we used to build structures, and we used to build ways to help the tribe expand and grow and be safer and live longer and be healthier. And evolution is funny. I liken it to the original blockchain of the blockchain of DNA, right? It's like we're all winners of the game of immortality, technically speaking. Like we are all part of an unbroken lineage of our ancestors till back to the beginning of whatever time is that we're still all trying to figure out, and the story keeps changing, which is really fun to keep up with. We learn more stuff, and it goes back further and further in the history books. Got to rewrite everything, and in that lineage is like, what game are you playing? Like, how do you want to show up in the world? What do you want to do or accomplish or build, and why? And you figure that out, and then it's like, okay, how do we do this? How do I do this? And typically, you need a lot of help. Some people, you can be a one-man or one-woman island. You can. It's possible, more so now with AI than anything else. But at the same time, we're a social species. And typically, when you bring people together, if you're a leader, naturally, embrace it. Lead people. And most people want to be led. That's just a simple fact of nature and human psychology. So if you embrace that about yourself and you tap into it, it could be, you could be on the school playground and people can't make a decision, and you're on the dodgeball team and like, no, you over on this team, you on that team, and whatever it might be. Or if you're with friends and you're like, hey guys, what do you want to do tonight? Whatever. It's like, I don't know, I'm cool with anything, right? If you're like, I really want to go to have sushi, well, then bring it up, offer it out, invite others, right? In human design, there's like projector and generator, right? Projectors to wait for the invitation, and so people respond to that, and generators are responders. So you can respond to a lot of things. And when you understand that about yourself and interactions with others, it's great for team building. It's great for romantic relationships. It's great for family relationships. It's amazing for business. It's great for marketing. You can go through and design marketing based on the finite amounts of differences between all of us. There's a lot. But nowadays we can actually calculate for a lot of them. We can write sales pages, we can write marketing copy, we can create advertisements and different marketing campaigns, all based around who our audience is, who we're speaking to, who are we trying to help, what kind of value are we trying to create in the world, how do they think, how do they feel, what do they do, where do they go, who do they hang out with, what do they buy, what do they not buy, what do they stand for, what do they stand against. These again are all tenets that if you weave them in, A, you can improve your life and optimize it, but B, you can build something extraordinary and help a lot of people in the process if that's your game.
I love that you brought up human design, because it is something that has really stood out to me getting to know you. Is you often will reference me being a projector when you like invite me to things. You'll be like, I know you're a projector, so I just want you to know that like I'm inviting you to this thing. And I love that so much. Like it gives me the tingles. Like I adore that. And I know for me, as somebody who I feel very grateful, because I feel like there's a perception that as we get older, we get more stuck in our ways, we get more closed-minded. And I feel like I've gone the opposite. I've become much more open-minded as I've gotten older, and I think it has frankly improved the quality of my life and my connections, because I'm just curious, and I think curiosity is a driver of flow and greatness and all those things. I'd love to hear a little bit of how you got interested in it, but more importantly, how did you merge that with like hard science of your passion for health and biohacking, and how did it play? You've touched on it lightly, but becoming a real behemoth in marketing and business, people consider that to be very like cut and dry, and people consider things like human design and astrology to be very like woo-woo. I'm wondering how you merge those together, and then more specifically, if you could give a little bit more depth on the examples of how did that play into your leadership journey and your evolution? Because the things that you have accomplished, and we should probably lay those out a little bit more clearly for listeners, because if people here are listening for business, like Caleb is your guy. We're talking about a lot of life stuff, but hopefully you're seeing how it applies. But you have built a ton of businesses, and you could not have done that without being able to lead a team, without being able to engage with your market in an extremely intelligent, strategic, calculated in a good way manner. And so I'm really curious kind of how those two sides play together for you and how that's, how that's played out in those roles.
Yeah. So, I mean, going back to the beginning of time, my mom was very metaphysical woo woo. I grew up in a very metaphysical, wild household in that way. I was, very young and going to peyote ceremonies and sweat lodges and, Native American drum circles and a lot of things. A lot of metaphysical fairs and crystal shows and all these, weird, wacky things. Everybody thought they were total weirdos. And I just, thought my mom was kind of crazy at some point. So I'm like, Mom, I love you so much, but come on, like, this thing over here. I rebelled against that as I got older, and I went more science. So I went hardcore science and neuroscience and biology and everything. Understanding, like, from that scientific, I like the structure, I like the experimental framework, I like the theory. Like, okay, cool, like, how does this work? How does this function? And somebody somewhere did experiments to figure that out. And I really resonated with that a lot because you can apply it to your life. You can try something, and in some ways it works, in some way it doesn't. That's the thing about physics and math that really drew my attention, is it goes above and beyond human opinion. So for me, it helped kind of just first principle style, just like really clear out all the noise, and I could tap into the signal. And, eventually I started to learn that, oh, these are one and the same. It's all connected. Sounds cliche, and it is very true in a lot of ways. And bridging that gap between, like, science and spirituality, for example, just really lights up my dopamine receptors. I love it. I get into it. And I started playing around with it. But for me, it really came down to what was useful. I was like, what am I going to do or try, and how does it work or not? Again, the evidence leads to confidence. So from astrology, a lot of people, oh, it's woo-woo, this, that, or the other thing. Everybody has their different views. That's totally cool. I looked at it from a mathematical and geometric perspective, and understanding physics to a certain degree of understanding that, if you apply pressure to something, it can change how something works. If you remove pressure, it does something different, right? And if you have these big things floating around in space, and you have the moon cruising around that's affecting the tides and human biology in different ways, how light affects biology, I got really geeked out about. And understanding those things, I realized, wow, there's actually a lot of wisdom in the sages. There's a lot of wisdom in the ancient teachings. Love Joseph Campbell's work, Hero's Journey, and things like that. And it's like he went around the world studying all the different religions and looking at cave wall paintings and talking with tribes. And it's all the same story with different characters, right? But it's interesting that story has stood the test of time. And people keep telling it and retelling it. And then people realize, like, oh, if we tweak it a little bit here, a little bit there, we can get different results. You can manipulate and control populations to a certain extent. There's a lot of cool stuff you can go into there. And so I realized that science didn't have all the answers. And also spirituality didn't have all the answers. There's some stuff in there that didn't work out for me. And there's some stuff in science that also didn't work out. And I realized that, I don't know everything. And if I think I do, I'm kind of crazy. And I don't think anyone really knows everything. I think we all know something. And ideally, we work better together to understand and accomplish greater things, build greater things, whether it's a company or engineering or building a bridge or, a house or a church or anything, doesn't matter. We come together and lend our skill sets to that. So from a leadership perspective, I started noticing in my personal life how astrology was a start kind of for me, helped. And, my mom, she was going into it, and she ran astro-cartography chart for me when I was younger, which is just applying astrology to the planet Earth and, like, locations, geographical locations. And she said, oh, your Jupiter line's over here through here and here and here. And I looked at her, I'm like, this is my snowboarding days. I'm like, Mom, like, at the time we live in Colorado. So I'm like, Mom, you're telling me this line runs through Las Vegas, Nevada? That's a desert. I'm a snowboarder. Identity, right? My identity at the time was a snowboarder. And I was like, there's no snow there. I'm not going to go there. And then another one ran through Arizona. Again, it's hot. It's a desert. I'm not going to go there. Ran through Vancouver, BC, in Canada. I was like, okay, there's snow there. I got posters of snowboarders on my wall of, doing big pillow lines in Vancouver up in Whistler. And I was like, okay, that's cool. And then, as I got older and synchronicity unfolds and I listen to my intuition and I try things, some things fail, some things work, I go along and I moved to Arizona. Funny enough, I had an opportunity to start a martial arts school there in a health center. And that's where I left home to go to, was Arizona when I was 18. And I got there and I realized, wait a minute. My mom years ago, she told me that this was like one of the places with my astrology. I was like, what is this stuff? I was like, whatever, kind of blew it off. And then had an opportunity to go be mentored and work with Joe Sugarman directly in Las Vegas. So he moved me out to Las Vegas to work with him out of the Blue Blocker headquarters in Tropicana, just outside the Strip. And I was like, okay, I'm in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I'm living there. I'm like, this is the second spot that she told me about. And then I got invited to an event and a mastermind up in Vancouver, BC. A lot of my friends were going to it. Really hilarious stories behind all that. But anyways, I went up there and I got there and I was just like, wow, this is a beautiful city. This is incredible. And I went there twice. I went there once for a snowboarding trip with some friends. He was doing a team retreat kind of a thing up there, and I snowboarded. It was great, but I didn't see the city. And then the next time was for the event, the mastermind in the event, and I got to see the city. And I was like, wow, I grew up with posters of Whistler on my wall, snowboarding. I got to snowboard there. It was incredible. And then I fell in love with the city and the people in Vancouver. It's just such an incredible place, a magical place. And I ended up moving there, and it's just like each way that my mom told me I was going to go, right, whether it's subconscious or conscious, doesn't really matter, because everything, whatever you want to call it in life, the energy, the source, whatever it might be, I just listened to that signal as best I could. And I listened through numbers. I listened through astrology, through numerology, and my sacral connection, just like how I feel into things as a responder, like generator in human design. So it just led me along that path. I was like, wow, that's really useful. And then doing product launches, I'm looking at the timing. You have to send an email, and I realized, wait a minute, I can run astrology calculations for email campaigns and launch, timelines. And I was like, what if I write a chart for a product launch? And I figure out some optimal times based on astrology, which sounds crazy. But I was like, how can I split test this? And so literally did a big health launch back in the day with David Wolf. He's a wonderful, amazing guy that teaches about superfoods and longevity and health. And they taught me so much. Incredible time working with him back in the day. And we were very successful helping a lot of others learn these things. And I applied the split test of astrology to timing when we would send emails, when we would send text messages, when we would, send this out to promote that or wherever we might go on different channels. And I just did one with like bad astrology. It's like, this is a time not to do it. Just don't do it here, ideally. And there's a time where it's like, this is optimal. This is really great. And so we kept all the rest of the controls the same. Copywriting was the same. Landing pages were the same. All that stuff was the same. The only thing that changed was the timing, the dates and times. So in doing that, we had incredible success. Every single time we did the astrology for it, we outperformed the control every single time. I was like, okay, this is something interesting. So I kept applying it again and again and again. Now you layer on human design. I started doing a similar thing with human design for teams and team building and such too. And so in personal life, in romantic life, in dating, in family, in communication, in teams, and building businesses and systems and structures and organizations, I found that these ancient systems that have been told through stories that have, lasted the test of time, whether you believe they're crazy or not, I found them very useful. And I applied them. And there's a really interesting quote that kind of persuaded me. I don't know if the quote's true or not. You have to double check things or whatever, but it always stuck with me. Regardless of whether it's true or not, again, I find it useful. Which is, millionaires don't believe in astrology. Billionaires do. And who said that was J.P. Morgan. Because if you dig into it, banking, finances, mathematics, currency, currency, right? There's a lot of really interesting distinctions here where they used that and it gave them an edge. And that edge allowed them to become, giants, leaders in their space as builders or whatever it might be, whatever you think about them in different ways, no judgment, just, hey, things are what they are. And some of the stuff worked really well. But if you can also convince a competitor that it's crazy and you shouldn't do it, that's also an edge, because they're like, this astrology woo-woo junk, they're not going to use it. But if you do, and if there is something to it, which I think there is, I feel there is, well then, you see how the cards play out and you see how the game goes, know when to hold them, know when to fold them.
Yeah.